Daniel stared out the window, watching the ominous clouds roll in. The thunderstorm had been forecasted all week, but it seemed the weather reports had downplayed its intensity. Now, with the sky an angry shade of black, he felt a sense of foreboding settle in his chest. His small cabin, nestled deep in the woods, suddenly felt very isolated. He had come here for peace and quiet, to escape the chaos of the city and his increasingly stressful job. But now, as the first rumble of thunder shook the air, Daniel wondered if solitude was what he really needed. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and sending leaves skittering across the yard. Daniel double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, ensuring everything was secure. He had stocked up on supplies and figured he could ride out the storm without much trouble. As the rain began to fall in heavy sheets, Daniel lit a few candles and settled in with a book. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls, but he tried to ignore them, focusing on the pages in front of him. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder cracking like a whip and lightning illuminating the sky in blinding flashes. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Daniel sighed and set his book aside, feeling his way to the kitchen for more candles. As he lit them, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. He froze, the match burning down to his fingers. Who could possibly be out here in this weather? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he moved toward the door. He hesitated, hand on the doorknob, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer, just the relentless drumming of rain and another urgent knock. Taking a deep breath, Daniel opened the door a crack, peering out into the storm. A figure stood on the porch, drenched and shivering. "Please, let me in," the figure said, their voice barely audible over the storm. Daniel opened the door wider, allowing the stranger inside. They were young, maybe in their early 20s, with wild eyes and a look of sheer terror on their face. "Thank you," they gasped, collapsing onto the nearest chair. "What are you doing out here?" Daniel asked, shutting the door and bolting it once more. "It's dangerous." "I know," the stranger replied, trembling. "But I had no choice. Something's out there. It was following me." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, something?" The strangers shook their head, hugging themselves tightly. "I don't know. I was driving through the woods when my car broke down. I started walking, and that's when I felt it. Like eyes on me, you know. And then I heard it. Footsteps just behind me. I ran, but it kept coming." Daniel glanced at the window, expecting to see a monstrous face pressed against the glass. But there was nothing, just the relentless rain and flashes of lightning. "You're safe here," he said, trying to reassure himself as much as the stranger. The hours passed slowly, the storm showing no signs of abating. Daniel and the stranger, who introduced themselves as Alex, tried to make conversation, but the tension was palpable. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made them jump. Then, in a moment of silence between thunderclaps, Daniel heard it. The faint sound of footsteps outside. He looked at Alex, who had gone pale, eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" Daniel whispered. Alex nodded, barely breathing. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Someone or something was out there, circling the cabin. Daniel grabbed a heavy flashlight and edged toward the door. "Stay here," he told Alex, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. He opened the door slowly, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the rain. He could see nothing, just the empty yard, and the trees swaying violently in the wind. But the footsteps continued, now sounding impossibly close. A bolt of lightning lit up the sky, and in that brief moment of brightness, Daniel saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching him. The figure was tall, with indistinct features, but its presence radiated malevolence. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He slammed the door shut and bolted it, his mind racing. "There's someone out there," he told Alex, his voice shaking. We need to call for help." But when he reached for his phone, there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. They were completely cut off. The footsteps resumed, this time at the front of the cabin, then around the side. Daniel and Alex huddled together, every nerve on edge. The figure outside seemed to be toying with them, relishing their fear. Just as Daniel felt he could take no more, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the storm. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity. Finally, Daniel dared to look out the window. There was no sign of the figure. Maybe it was gone. Maybe they were safe. But as he turned back to Alex, he saw the look of horror on their face. Slowly, Daniel followed their gaze to the dark corner of the room. There, dripping wet and with eyes that seemed to glow in the candlelight, stood the figure. Inside the cabin, the storm raged on outside, but inside, the real terror had only just begun. Shane had always loved thunderstorms. The rumble of thunder, the flash of lightning, the smell of rain. These were his comfort in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. He found solace in the storm's ferocity, as if nature's fury somehow mirrored his inner turmoil. It was a particularly dark and stormy night when Shane's perspective on thunderstorms changed forever. He had been driving home from work, the sky rapidly darkening as ominous clouds gathered overhead. He enjoyed the first few drops of rain pattering against his windshield, but his contentment quickly turned to unease as the storm intensified. The rain came down in sheets, and visibility dropped to nearly zero. Shane's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel, trying to navigate the winding country road that led to his secluded home. Lightning flashed, illuminating the twisted branches of the trees that lined the road, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered. As he rounded a particularly sharp bend, his headlights caught something in the road, a figure standing still, drenched in rain. Shane slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from the person. Heart pounding, he rolled down his window. "Are you all right?" he called out, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. The figure stepped closer, revealing a young woman, her clothes soaked and clinging to her body. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she trembled uncontrollably. "Please, can you help me?" she stammered. "My car broke down. I was trying to get to the nearest town." Shane nodded, gesturing for her to get in. She climbed into the passenger seat, shivering and wet. He handed her his jacket and turned up the heat, trying to offer some comfort. "I'm Shane," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's your name?" "Megan," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for stopping. I didn't know what I was going to do." As they drove, Megan explained that she had been visiting a friend in the next town over and was heading home when her car died. She had been walking for what felt like hours, and the storm had only made things worse. Shane listened, glancing over occasionally to check on her, but something felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he found himself checking the rearview mirror more often than usual. The darkness beyond the reach of his headlights seemed to press in closer, and every flash of lightning revealed the desolate road stretching out behind them. "Where exactly did your car break down?" Shane asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "About a mile back," Megan replied, pointing vaguely over her shoulder. "It just stopped, and I couldn't get it started again." Shane nodded, his mind racing. Something about Megan's story didn't add up. He had driven that road countless times, and there were no signs of a broken-down car. But before he could press her for more details, Megan's demeanor changed. She turned to him, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "Shane, I think someone is following us," she whispered. His blood ran cold. He glanced in the rearview mirror again, but saw nothing but the darkness. Yet the sense of being watched grew stronger. His grip on the wheel tightened as he accelerated, hoping to outrun whatever it was that lurked in the storm. Just then, a loud thud sounded from the roof of the car, followed by the scrape of something dragging across the metal. Scene's heart pounded in his chest as he and Megan exchanged terrified glances. "Did you hear that?" Megan asked, her voice shaking. "Stay calm," Scene replied, though he felt anything but calm. "We're almost to my house. We'll be safe there." He sped up, the car bouncing over the rough road. The thudding continued, more insistent now, as if whatever was on the roof was trying to break through. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, Scene saw a dark shape clinging to the roof. "Hang on," he shouted, swerving the car violently. The shape slid off, disappearing into the darkness. They reached Scene's house in record time, the car skidding to a stop in the driveway. He and Megan bolted from the vehicle, racing to the front door. Fumbling with his keys, Scene finally managed to unlock the door, and they stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them. Breathing heavily, they locked all the doors and windows, the storm raging outside. The sense of relief was short-lived, however, as they heard a scratching at the door, followed by a low guttural growl. Scene's heart pounded as he backed away from the door. The growling continued, a menacing reminder that something, or someone, was out there. Megan clung to his arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to call the police," Scene said, his voice barely steady. He reached for his phone, only to find it missing. Panic surged through him as he realized it must have fallen out during their frantic escape from the car. "I don't have mine either," Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "It must be in my car." Scene cursed under his breath. "We'll use the landline," he said, pulling her toward the kitchen. They stumbled through the darkened house, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning outside. Scene picked up the phone, but the line was dead. The storm had knocked out the power and the phone lines. A loud crash from the living room made them both jump. Scene grabbed a kitchen knife and gestured for Megan to stay behind him. They crept back to the living room, peering around the corner. The front window was shattered, rain pouring in and soaking the carpet. A dark figure stood just inside the room, its back to them. Scene's grip on the knife tightened. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Megan, moving forward slowly. The figure turned, and in the dim light, Scene saw the man's face, pale, with wild eyes that seemed to glint in the darkness. "Who are you?" Scene demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The man grinned, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down Scene's spine. "You took something that belongs to me," he said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Now I'm here to take it back." Scene glanced at Megan, confusion and fear in his eyes. "We don't have anything of yours," he said, stepping forward cautiously. "Just leave us alone." The intruder's grin widened. "Oh, but you do," he said, taking a step closer. "You see, Megan here is not who she says she is." Scene looked at Megan, her face a mask of terror. What is he talking about? Before she could answer, the man lunged at Scene. They grappled, the knife clattering to the floor. Megan screamed, backing away as the two men fought. Scene struggled, but the man was strong, his grip like iron. They crashed into the furniture, knocking over a lamp and sending shards of glass flying. Desperate, Scene managed to push the man off him and scramble to his feet. "Run, Megan," he shouted, grabbing the knife from the floor. But Megan didn't move. Instead, she looked at the man, a strange expression crossing her face. "I'm sorry, Scene," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Before Scene could react, the man lunged at him again. This time, Scene was ready. He swung the knife, slashing the intruder across the chest. The man screamed, stumbling back. Blood poured from the wound, but he kept coming. Scene knew they couldn't keep this up. He had to end it now. With a final surge of strength, he drove the knife into the man's side. The intruder gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He collapsed to the floor, the fight draining out of him. Breathing heavily, Scene turned to Megan. "What is going on?" he demanded. "Who was that?" Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't know he would follow me," she sobbed. He's my ex. I left him because he was dangerous, but he found me. I thought I could get away, but he must have tracked me somehow. Scene felt a mix of anger and pity. Why didn't you tell me the truth? I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to drag you into this. I'm so sorry. Sirens wailed in the distance, the sound growing louder as they approached. The police had finally arrived. Scene let the knife drop from his hand, exhaustion and relief washing over him. It's over now, he said, pulling Megan into a comforting embrace. It's over. But as the storm continued to rage outside, Scene couldn't shake the feeling that the night's events were far from over. The sense of being watched lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had invaded their lives.